Hello and welcome to the Nashua Community Roundtable. I am your host, David Lyle, and with me today is Republican Rep. Neal Kurk, who is also the chairman of the House Finance Committee. Welcome, Neal.
Good to see you, David.
And just want to get into a little bit about what, as we were talking just before the show about what the city elections were like here in Nashua. What does it look like up in Ware? What is the structure for government in the city?
Well, Ware's a town. We don't quite aspire to city status. Nashua's population is probably 10 times ours. We're about 9,000 people, a little less than 9,000 people. So we're relatively small. We don't have a mayor. We have a board of selectmen. There are 5 in our town, and they're elected for 3-year terms annually. So one year it's 2 people, the next year it's 1 person, then 2 people, and so on. The board is nonpartisan in a very different sense from Nashua being nonpartisan. We're truly just plain folk who get involved, and most of them have never been involved in any other public office except selectmen. They might have been, involved in some committee in town, like on the finance committee or on the planning board or the conservation commission. Or they've been involved with the Board of Fire Wards or something like that. But these are folks who genuinely want to get involved and think that they can do something good for the town. And so they're running just based on their relationships with friends and neighbors and things like that. So we've got a pretty good Board of Selectmen. And then we have what we call committees to do a good deal of the work. We have a planning board which deals with zoning issues and subdivision approvals. We have a board of fire wards which supervises the fire department. Our police chief is appointed by the selectmen and answers to the selectmen, but runs his department obviously independently. But as with all of the departments in our town, their budgets may be recommended by the selectmen, but they have to be voted on by the voters. So unlike Nashua, which is a more representative kind of democracy where you have aldermen who vote on budgets, in Ware we are a true town meeting democracy where every voter in town, we're an SB2 town, meaning that we don't have a town meeting where all of us are together in the same room, but we have an official ballot form of government. So do you approve the budget that the selectmen have proposed? And if the answer is no, we go to something called a default budget, which is last year's budget with some adjustments to it. So the selectmen are always trying to make sure that they read the mood of the electorate very well so that their budget is likely to pass. In Ware we have a non-legislative finance committee. We created our own finance committee. It's not a statutory one. And they review the selectmen's budget, make recommendations to the voters, and then the voters get a handout paid for out of tax dollars, which explains every budget, every item on our warrant, because in addition to voting on the budget, in our town, anybody can propose, in effect, what's legislation. And so there are various warrant articles dealing with zoning. Somebody wants his street paved. He tries to put in a warrant article, almost always defeated because there is a budget in which those kinds of issues are decided. We have a conservation commission, which at the moment is trying to get some of our town forests logged in accordance with recommendations by a forester. And we take that logging money and put it in an account dedicated to conservation. So, for example, there may be some parcels of land which the town feels would be better not developed, but kept in timber or farm or whatever it might be used for. And that fund is used to acquire that land, so the town goes out and buys land. Sometimes we get grants from the Land and Conservation Heritage Investment Program, LCHIP, from the state, which is used with other money to acquire land. Sometimes they just acquire conservation easements. So the land can continue to be used and owned by its present owner, but it can't be developed for housing or whatever. Ware has had some problems. I don't want to make it sound more delightful than it is, and it is a delightful town. In the past, we've had some issues with our police department, gotten involved in a lot of lawsuits, and as a result have had to pay out a lot of money, and that's hurting us badly when it comes to taxes, because the insurance rates have gone up significantly. But other than that, we're a town that, like most other towns, has their problems. But by and large, the people who live there find it a very pleasant place to live with very nice neighbors. It's quite rural, and there are places where you can't see your neighbor. And of course, there are some subdivisions where your neighbors are cheek by jowl. In our neck of the woods, that would mean a 2-acre lot away from you, but you can see them out the window.
Okay, and would you say is Ware a growing town, or would you say it's relatively stable as a population? Or?
I think, like the rest of the state, currently the population is quite stable. But for example, in 1970, the population was 1,800 people. It went up to 3,200 people 10 years later in 1980, and then really went through the roof. And today, as I say, 40, almost 50 years later, we're up to 9,000. So we've gone up 5 times in 9 years.
And what is
5 times in slightly fewer than 50 years.
and what would you say are the schools are like in Ware? Are they? How would you rate the school system?
It's a good school system. The elementary school, we have a middle school. The elementary school is, let's say, 10, 15 years old. The middle school is maybe less than 10 years old. The high school is a regional high school. We share it with Henniker, and that's probably 25 years old. So the school facilities are in very good condition. We've put a lot of money into them. Voters are frugal, but we have adequate staff, and students do quite well. We're not as good as some schools, but we're much better than many other schools. I would say we're in the upper third in 9 years.
And what is
5 times in slightly fewer than 50 years.
and what would you say are the schools are like in Ware? Are they? How would you rate the school system?
It's a good school system. The elementary school, we have a middle school. The elementary school is, let's say, 10, 15 years old. The middle school is maybe less than 10 years old. The high school is a regional high school. We share it with Henniker, and that's probably 25 years old. So the school facilities are in very good condition. We've put a lot of money into them. Voters are frugal, but we have adequate staff, and students do quite well. We're not as good as some schools, but we're much better than many other schools. I would say we're in the upper third in the quality of our schools.
In the state or
in the state?
Okay. Yeah. All right. Now, since
But that's the bottom part of the upper third, probably. I don't want to suggest that we're on a par with Nashua or some of the better school systems in the state.
okay.
But we're good.
All right. Now, looking at our state and how things have been shaken up this year, I know that we typically have a lot of special elections happening. What do you feel is going to change with the upcoming elections that we do have for state and Senate seats?
David, I don't look as far ahead as you do, I guess. Those elections, I think, are the ones you're referring to, are November 2018.
Okay. Well, I know that I believe we do have some more special elections coming up.
Yes, we do have some of those. I personally don't pay too much attention to those. Those are due to somebody dying or moving out of district or resigning for some other reason. And I know that some people are scorekeepers, and they say, gee, one party, and I think this year it's the Democrats, won 4 out of 6. And that's a telling predictor of what will happen in November of 2018. I guess I'm not qualified to make those kinds of predictions, but my focus is on making sure that the people who elected me to serve a 2-year term from November of 2016 till roughly November or December of 2018, that I do everything I can to make sure that their interests are best served. I really like to get involved in legislative policy and trying to work with everyone to make sure that we make New Hampshire as vibrant and exciting a place to live as we possibly can. And over the decades, I think the legislature has done its share. Not certainly isn't the only thing that causes our state to be as nice as it is, but it does play a role. And we're ranked very highly on all sorts of national scales comparing New Hampshire to other states. The safest state or next to safest state, the best state in which to raise children, or one of the top 3, one of the top 5 healthiest states, and so forth. So those are the things that I concentrate on, and the speculation on politics is something that I leave to others. And you may be one of those who enjoys that. That just really is not my thing.
Okay, now in the House, we had a budget passed at the end of the session.
Mhm.
What do you? Is there anything in the budget that you feel could have been done better, or what do you think uh, it's going to affect? What effect do you think it's going to have on the New Hampshire economy?
Very important things done in that budget, and one of them was to reduce business taxes, which I think will have, over time, not immediately, a very, very positive effect on the New Hampshire business climate. Right now, business is booming, so much so that when you go down Main Street, so to speak, you don't see McDonald's advertising for hamburgers. Uh, they're advertising for help wanted ads. And this happened in the early 2000s, when we also were going through another boom period. I think the real problem facing New Hampshire over the long run is something that it's going to be difficult to get a grip on, but we have to do, and that is our stable population. You asked before whether WEARE'S population was growing, and I said, no, not really. The state of New Hampshire isn't growing. Our state population doubled, as WEARE'S did, in the 70s and 80s and mid-90s, and increased since then. But since 2000, 2005, we've really slowed down. We've hardly grown, maybe 0.5% a year. That's nothing compared to what we used to be growing at. And what's happening that's more important is our population is aging. In other words, we're not having as many children as we used to have per person, per woman. And the number of people coming in to New Hampshire from Massachusetts, other states, even foreign countries, isn't today what it once was. So I know from the WEARE school system, our school population is declining. It's not because the high school kids are going elsewhere. It's because at one point, we weren't getting in new first graders. And so we're faced with a situation, especially in our high school, where over the past 10 years or so, we've seen a major decline in population from almost 900 to something around 600. And this is what's true for the state also. In about 2000, we had, these are rough numbers and I'm probably wrong in the number, but order of magnitude, about 220,000 children in grades, I think 1 through 12. Now we're at about 170 or 175,000 increase in the population. And what that means is you and I'm much older than you are, as I age and eventually die, the increase in population that we used to have that would replace me isn't. So who's going to care for me in my older years? Who's going to flip the burgers at McDonald's? Who's going to do the high-tech work at Albany? And who's going to be our police and our firefighters? If we don't have younger people coming in so that the age curve is adequately filled at the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings, the 40-somethings, the 50-somethings, we're going to have a state that has real problems in the future for business having enough people to do the job. So I'm very concerned about what we do with our demographic situation. A couple of years ago, the New Hampshire Center for Public Policy Studies published a serious report on this called the Silver Tsunami. Silver hair, tsunami, tidal wave. And that's what we're facing. We're one of the oldest states in the nation. I think only Maine is older on average than we are. It's hard to run a state where you have a very significant proportion of the population elderly and needing services, and very few, relatively speaking, younger people to provide those services, to get and businesses to hire people to create the income that might be taxed and used to support state services for everyone. So that's the thing that we have to come to grips with. I'm involved in a study committee that's going to come out with a report, which you as a representative will see, where we make some recommendations on getting information on which we can base good public policy. If we do nothing, this state is going to be in very bad financial shape over the next 20 to 30 years. Now, we can kick the can down the road the way the federal government does with respect to Social Security reforms, Medicare reforms, and Medicaid reforms, and let the next guy do it. But I think we're different in New Hampshire, and I think once this report comes out, the legislature will start to take action and make some tough decisions. Maybe not right away, but within the next 3 to 5 years. If we don't, it's going to be very difficult for many of our friends and neighbors.
All right. Now, we've been seeing a lot on the news about the governor is trying to get Amazon to open up a headquarters here in New Hampshire. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I commend the governor for his efforts. I would be surprised if they're successful. I think Amazon is looking for a very different situation than what we have. They need to employ 50,000 people, and we couldn't possibly provide 50,000 employees. They would have to come from Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, Connecticut, New York, and other places. So that is one real problem, I think, for Amazon here. The location's excellent. Woodmont Common, I guess it's called, in Londonderry is the site that he's proposing. Some 600 acres, great access to an airport. The Manchester Airport is right by there.
Along with 93.
Yeah, there's excellent transportation and access, and it would be a wonderful place for Amazon employees to live here. This is a great state to live and to raise your family. It really is. It's if it's not the best, it's one of the top 3. But I don't think we're close enough to a labor market that can afford to provide Amazon with the people that it needs for them to give us serious consideration. I hope I'm wrong, but I'd be surprised if they came here. The other thing I applaud the governor for doing is making it clear that we have a lot to offer, but one thing we will not offer is financial inducements. I remember a number of years ago, Mississippi wanted to get a Mercedes plant. It cost them $300 million taxpayer dollars to get that plant. I don't know what that comes out to per job, but New Hampshire isn't in that kind of a league. And frankly, I'm glad we're not. There's a problem having a major, large employer. If times change and that employer lays off people or the employer goes bankrupt and leaves, the hole in the state and the economy is enormous.
Almost like a corporation town.
Well, look what's going to happen to Hartford when some of the insurance companies are leaving, Hartford, Connecticut. Look what happened to Connecticut when GE decided to decamp to Boston.
Detroit.
Take all their employees with them. We really are better off having a large number of smaller businesses perhaps that were started in somebody's garage here, and grow in New Hampshire than we are, I think, in getting mega businesses, Fortune 500 type businesses from outside the state. Of course, we may not have a choice, so my wish may be fulfilled. But those are the companies which I think stay here, grow here, and will be in such a diverse variety of fields that when, as is usually the case, some of them don't make it, the negative impact on the state will be acceptable because it's a relatively small bankruptcy.
So basically a small impact over a large impact.
Exactly.
Now, in the House, recently the Speaker was nominated for the Commissioner of Agriculture, and it looks like he's accepting. If he gets confirmed into the position, do you have any ideas on who might be the next Speaker or running for the next Speaker?
I think we know who's running for the Speaker should he be confirmed, but I'd like to, I'll answer that or discuss that in a minute. I'd like to look at this more broadly. Sean JASPER was elected Speaker first in 2014 and then again in 2016. In 2014, the Republican Party, which held the majority and under normal circumstances nominates the leader of the House, the Republican Party caucused and selected Bill O'Brien, a former Speaker, to be their candidate. for reasons for which Mr. O'Brien is probably responsible. He did not get the necessary number of votes, and so Representative Jasper worked across the aisles and got some Democrat votes and some Republican votes and was elected Speaker. And many of the supporters of Representative O'Brien and other Republicans deeply resented that action. I was one who never voted for Representative Jasper. I voted for Mr. O'Brien because he was the party's nominee. I'm not resentful. I don't have time for that. I want to make sure that whatever it is the people of Ware felt they could expect from me, I deliver. And so I was asked by Representative Jasper to chair the Finance Committee. I accepted. There were other people who were supporters of Representative O'Brien who were asked to chair various committees, and some of them turned Speaker Jasper down because they felt that he didn't represent the Republican Party. And to some extent they were right. But nonetheless, he was the Speaker, and it seems to me that all of us should do whatever we can to make sure that the legislature is successful and put aside some of these other quarrels in the larger interest of all of the people of New Hampshire, and not have internecine fights interfere with the ability of the legislature to function and do the business that the people expect us to get done. Most folks really don't pay attention to what the legislature does, except a few signature bills that come out and get a lot of press coverage. There's a lot of work that has to be done to make that happen, and a lot of other things that has to be done to make the state function that really is of not particular interest, and really should not be of particular interest to most citizens who have their own busy lives and elected you and me to represent them, so they didn't have to come to Concord and spend all of their time doing this work. So our job is to do that work and put aside petty peeves, quarrels, ideological differences, partisan politics, and get the job done. Not all of us can do it, and not all of us do it all of the time. I mean, I'm as guilty as the next guy of engaging on occasion in petty or partisan politics. I try not to, but it happens. I'm human like the rest of us. So
you'd think he's been a fair and
I think he's made
a nonpartisan speaker, so to speak.
In his role as Speaker, yes. But remember, the Speaker has two roles. He's also the leader of the party in the House, as well as the embodiment of the House as its Speaker. I think he's done a very good job in his nonpartisan role as Speaker of the House. He's been fair. He's made sure that everybody has had a role and can participate if they wish to. But that's what all of our speakers have done, and he's not exceptional in this respect. He's doing what a speaker's job is, and I think he's done it well. In his partisan role, I think he's been very modest. I don't think he's been a particularly partisan speaker. For example, I wasn't one of his supporters. He appointed me to an important leadership position because he was looking for the best people, as opposed to my supporters who I'm going to reward simply because they supported me, because he wanted to make the House the best possible House to get the job done. So I admire him. I'm very disappointed that he's leaving. I understand that for him it's the opportunity of a lifetime. He comes from a farming family. He really has farming interests at heart. For 30 years he's been the advisor to the agriculture fraternity at the University of New Hampshire in Durham. His family was in the egg business and the poultry business for decades, grandfather, father, and so forth. So I know he will do an extraordinary job as agriculture in developing that segment of our economy. But I think leaving the House in midstream is really is a surprise that we have to figure out how to deal with. And my sense is that the best thing is to make as few changes as possible. So one of the 5 candidates on the Republican side that's contesting for Speaker is the current Deputy Speaker, a fellow named Gene Chandler from the small town of Bartlett, way up north. And I think supporting him is the right thing to do because he will continue what Representative Jasper, the Speaker, has done. There will be very few changes, and it will be as close to business as usual as possible. If one of the other candidates is elected, I'm concerned that there will be a midstream change, changing horses in midstream, that kind of a thing. And the necessary turmoil to get a legislature organized and working efficiently, we've already done that. I don't see any reason to do that again because it will decrease our ability to be as productive legislatively as we have been. That is to come up with good policy positions on some of the legislation before us. So I hope we have as few changes as possible. But on the Republican side, there are 5 candidates. My understanding is on the Democratic side, there's only one, and that's the current minority leader, Representative Shurtleff from Pennacook.
Do you have any LSRs or bills coming up for this year?
Many.
What would you say are your top 5?
Well, my concern in the legislature over the decades is focused on privacy, personal privacy, freedom from government interference in our lives, freedom from corporate interference in our lives. And so I have a number of bills, again, dealing with that subject. One of them is a constitutional amendment that would enshrine a right to privacy in our Constitution. Another one is a bill dealing with drones, which, as you know, can be controlled and have cameras on board and can be very invasive if it's your neighbor's teenage son is flying his drone outside your bedroom window or over your backyard where your daughter is sunbathing in her bikini. So I have some legislation that would deal with that. Also limiting the use of drones by the state in many situations. I don't think it's a good idea for the state police, for example, and they're not proposing this, to create film dossiers of where all of us are at all the time, which you can do with a drone very inexpensively. So I'm trying to say, let's make sure the drones are used for good purposes. If we're going to use them for criminal investigation purposes, let's make sure, like any other criminal investigation tool, there's a warrant where it's required. Not in the cases of emergency, of course. Somebody gets lost.
Looking at aerial drones.
I'm sorry?
Aerial drones or all drones? Because I know the bomb, if you think about it, the robot that works with the bomb, they have with the bomb squads typically is a land drone.
I'm speaking of aerial drones only.
Okay.
Only aerial drones. I didn't realize those were called drones.
Well, it would qualify the same definition because it's operated by remote.
I see. Well, my bill deals only with aerial drones. And then I have some other bills making sure that we have an enhanced right to privacy on our own private property, so that folks who might want to come and take photographs, whether by drone or otherwise, have to respect our privacy in our homes and on our property. I have some bills dealing with the Medicaid program, and a number of others. I originally had 27 or 28 ideas for legislation that I was going to introduce, and before I do that, I share them with people. Am I off the wall on this? Is this a good idea? Has this been done before and there's no reason to do it again? What we have now is working. There's no reason to try to improve it. And after speaking with people, those 27 were whittled down to probably 10 or 11. And by the time the legislative drafting people get finished with them, I will probably decide that 2 or 3 of them just are not worth doing because they're too complicated, or I haven't done my homework well enough to really justify this. I'll probably wind up with 8 or 9 bills.
When you're talking about Medicaid, what changes are you looking to make?
Well, one of the things I want to make sure is that we don't spend more money on Medicaid than we have to. And right now, my understanding is that there are a number of people who should not be on the rolls because they've left the state, for example. Or they're no longer eligible because their income is too high, or whatever it might be. And we continue paying these people for months beyond the time when they should be paid. So one part of my bill dealing with Medicaid would require the Department of Health and Human Services to create film dossiers of where all of us are at all the time, which you can do with a drone very inexpensively. So I'm trying to say, let's make sure the drones are used for good purposes. If we're we're going to use them for criminal investigation purposes, let's make sure, like any other criminal investigation tool, there's a warrant where it's required. Not in the cases of emergency, of course. Somebody gets lost.
Looking
and we
at
need a drone.
aerial drones.
I'm sorry?
Aerial drones or all drones? Because I know the bomb. If you think about it, the robot that works with the bomb, they have with the bomb squads typically is a land drone. 'cause
I'm
it's remote
speaking of
control.
aerial drones only.
Okay.
Only aerial drones. I didn't realize those were called drones.
Well, it would qualify the same definition because it's operated by remote.
I see. Well, my bill deals only with aerial drones. And then I have some other bills making sure that we have an enhanced right to privacy on our own private property, so that folks who might want to come and take photographs, whether by drone or otherwise, have to respect our privacy in our homes and on our property. I have some bills dealing with the Medicaid program, and a number of others. I originally had 27 or 28 ideas for legislation that I was going to introduce, and before I do that, I share them with people. You know, am I off the wall on this? Is this a good idea? Has this been done before and there's no reason to do it again? What we have now is working. There's no reason to try to improve it. And after speaking with people, those 27 were whittled down to probably 10 or 11. And by the time the legislative drafting people get finished with them, I will probably decide that 2 or 3 of them just are not worth doing because they're too complicated, or I haven't done my homework well enough to really justify this. I'll probably wind up with 8 or 9 bills.
When you're talking about Medicaid, what changes are you looking to make?
Well, one of the things I want to make sure is that we don't spend more money on Medicaid than we have to. And right now, my understanding is that there are a number of people who should not be on the rolls because they've left the state, for example. Or they're no longer eligible because their income is too high, or whatever it might be. And we continue paying these people for months beyond the time when they should be paid. So one part of my bill dealing with Medicaid would require the Department of Health and Human Services to stop that practice or to improve it so we don't spend as much money on people who no longer are entitled to it.
Do a regular financial audit of the...
It's not an audit. It's just telling them to institute procedures through rules to make sure this doesn't happen. So the Social Security has the same problem. If someone's on Social Security and dies, the checks keep coming until the Social Security Administration is informed. Now, it may be illegal and somebody may be forging a name, but the checks keep coming. So a system that, for example, enabled the Social Security system to learn of death records immediately might save the federal government a significant amount of money that's paid out and for one reason or another is not recovered. Same concept in New Hampshire. Let's not spend money where it's not supposed to be spent. Another issue that I'm concerned about is managed care, which is the use of private insurance-type companies to manage the care of people on Medicaid. We used to have a fee-for-service program where a Medicaid recipient would go to a doctor, get services, the doctor would bill the state would pay the bill. And that was very costly, so we changed the system to one where we hired, in effect, Medicaid managed care companies to work with people to make sure that they were getting the proper medical services in the most cost-effective manner. For example, making sure that diabetics were taking their medication, working to avoid unnecessary emergency room use. That has not worked out, as far as I know, and I'm still doing some investigation on this, as well as we had intended. The cost savings that we thought would be there have not yet materialized, and I haven't seen any evidence, that doesn't mean there isn't any, that means that I haven't seen any, that suggests that the care has improved. So the question arises, should we expand this to other areas which the law says, unless we take action to change it, will happen? One of those is to nursing homes, county nursing homes in particular. and to the folks who are developmentally disabled. Both of those are under traditional Medicaid, where it's a fee-for-service type system. Um, the law says that those by mid-2019, those are supposed to go into the managed care system. Um, I have serious doubts as to whether or not that's a good idea after seeing what didn't happen in, in Medicaid managed care for acute care, where you go to a hospital because you're ill or need an operation or you have some sickness. But long-term care, which is what we're talking about, and developmentally disabled assistance are very different situations, and I'm not sure that it's a good idea for us to extend um, managed care to those. So I have a bill in that would deal with that issue.
You had also mentioned enhanced privacy amendment.
It basically says in the Constitution that we have a right to privacy, which government cannot take unless they can demonstrate a compelling state interest. A lot of legal mumbo jumbo, but the basic concept is um, there will be a very high standard required before the government can do anything to restrict our freedoms, our personal liberties. And it's very general language, as is most of our Constitution. So we could have a lengthy discussion on what it covers and what it doesn't cover. It's sort of like the federal Constitution, where the First Amendment talks about freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Those phrases have engendered lawsuits and court cases for hundreds of years to flesh out that general understanding of what those mean. And I think the same thing would be true of this privacy amendment. It's written in general terms so that as time goes on, the legislature can get involved and the courts can get involved and flesh it out. But it establishes a very basic principle that the state cannot interfere with our private activities unless there's a compelling state interest.
All right. Now, I know that for several years, bringing the commuter rail up from Massachusetts into New Hampshire has been
Why
one of
am
the
I
big
not
hot
surprised,
topics.
David, that you're bringing up that subject?
I just want to get your thoughts on um, what you think the effect of the commuter rail would be in New Hampshire.
Um, commuter rail up to this point, and I'm not including the current private company offer to set up commuter rail between Lowell and Bedford through Nashua. There have been numerous studies on this which shows that there is not enough interest and the costs are so high so that the only way commuter rail would operate is if there were a subsidy. The subsidy would be in the order of $10 million a year, at least based on the estimates a few years ago. And the state, in my opinion, should not subsidize that kind of transportation. The federal government significantly subsidizes bus transportation in New Hampshire. They buy buses for the companies. They guarantee the bus company a management fee. They make up the shortfall in the fare box. I use the bus. I think it's great, but I don't think that I should be subsidized by taxpayers, in this case at the federal level, or our federal deficit grows larger. In the same way, I don't think it's appropriate for us to adopt a mode of transportation that requires a subsidy. If it could be operated so that the fare box covered the cost of the system, then go for it. But if it requires a subsidy, I don't think the North Country people, or even the folks in Ware who might occasionally use it, should subsidize the folks in Nashua and Bedford and others who would get the benefit from it. And the benefit is very clear. It's not just the people moving back and forth. It's the businesses which, but for the railroad, would have been built elsewhere in New Hampshire, but because of the railroad, tend to say, well, I'm going to locate nearer to the railroad in Nashua. So Nashua and Bedford would be major benefactors of this, and the losers would be the other communities who, but for the railroad, would have had these businesses developing in their town. So
Basically, businesses would be developing near areas of where the infrastructure would already be in place.
exactly. Because it gives me a better chance as a business to get employees, let's say from Lowell or Boston, or things like that. And perhaps, although they're talking about passenger rail, I assume there would be some freight involved, because even passenger trains can carry postal material and things like that. I don't know how much that would weigh into it, but all of the studies that I've read suggest that what rail does is to change the location within the state of where businesses are located, but not to increase um, the number of businesses or the number of jobs. So Nashua is a winner, Ware's a loser. Nashua is a winner, well, Manchester might be a gainer, but New London's a loser.
So the more rural communities would
It's
see a negative impact.
not just rural, but communities outside of the rail corridor.
Hmm.
So I can't support that. And on the other hand, let's talk about this new proposal. Here's what I think will happen. They're able to get huge amounts of federal grants. They actually upgrade the track or work out a deal with Pan Am, and that's a company that's very difficult to deal with. Pan Am owns the trackage rights. So they work out a deal with Pan Am, and they get their trackage rights. Tracks are brought up to speed. Somehow they get their cars and engines, and I don't know what kind of federal program is that. When we last looked, it's something like $200 to $300 million of capital costs to bring rail to Concord. Now, this is a different approach, and I don't know what the costs are, but they're very significant. And then they say they're going to have enough passengers and charge them enough to be able to cover this. I don't believe it'll be done. And therefore, in a few years, Nashua will be told by the company, look, we can't continue service. So if you want us to continue service, you're going to have to subsidize it. So the first thing that will happen is Nashua is going to scream bloody murder and go to the state and say, this benefits the whole state, so let's have the state subsidize Nashua. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think one of the risks that Nashua takes when they go ahead with this is that in a few years, they will be asked to pony up operating subsidies for this railroad. Because my guess is they cannot make it on their own without just by the fares they charge. Also, I think it's possible to get from, see, they're going to Worcester, this line, but I think they're going through Lowell.
Well, the low line and Worcester are different lines on the commuter rail.
But the run through Nashua would go to Lowell, and from Lowell you can get some sort of train service to Boston.
They would be looking at instead of bringing the MBTA train all the way up into Nashua, there'd be an interchange at Lowell.
Okay. And again, one of the problems with rail is that, unlike bus has the same thing too, I suppose, it's a fixed route. That works for some people going to Boston, but if I'm working on Route 128, not going to work for me because I'm too far from any kind of, I'm making this up, I'm too far from a train station or an MBTA station. So in any event, I just don't see that we have the basic population density and the economic ties to other communities that would make rail viable. Even in Europe, where they have population densities and where the jobs are, they still require government subsidies for commuter passenger rail. So I'm very dubious that this company is going to be able to operate only on the fare box. And I don't know what Nashua would do once you spent your $500,000 for your platforms, you've got this great station there, a lot of businesses move in, and then the company says, gee, I'm sorry, we need a subsidy. What would Mayor Doncha's successor do in that case? A lot of pressure from the businesses that moved here for that, to have Nashua do that, have the city taxpayers fork over that money, helps our business. I think that's the situation you're going to be faced with. So if you go down that road, I hope you will really contemplate the strong possibility that it is not going to be a free ride for the city.
All right, now we hear a lot of talk of energy independence and energy. What would you say, looking at how the systems are going here in New Hampshire? What is the likelihood of us either moving away from using natural gas, coal, or oil to other forms of energy like wind or solar?
This is not my area of expertise, David, but I was under the impression that if you use wind and solar, you have to have backup because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. So you still have to have gas-fired plants or coal-fired plants or oil-fired plants for those days when it's not windy and sunny. So you've got this huge capital investment in these plants, as I understand it, even if you have solar, even if you have wind. So I'm not sure that it's really possible if we want a constant supply of energy to think that we're going to get it from solar and wind. Hydro is a different matter. That seems to be a full-time source of power.
We've got 2 hydro dams here in Nashua.
But I would imagine they don't, at least in New Hampshire, I don't think they generate power, you know, in late summer. But I don't know.
I believe the Nashua ones actually do generate it through most of the year, and it's
The
enough
same
to
amount?
survive the whole. It varies depending on the weather, with the rain and such, because of the level of the.
But if that plant doesn't generate what is needed, then there has to be backup from some sort of fossil fuel. So energy independence, I always thought energy independence meant that the United States would produce enough energy so that it wouldn't have to import oil or anything else. And if we're not at that point now, we're pretty close to it with all the gas that we've gotten, natural gas that we've gotten from fracking. From a geopolitical point of view, that's a good thing for the United States because a lot of the European countries, as you know, are dependent upon Russian gas for their heating in the winter. And the Russians have used that gas as a political weapon. They cut it off to the Ukraine, for example, to influence the Ukrainian war. They held up Central European countries, I think including Germany and France at one point, to get more money because in the winter the gas has to flow or your people are pretty cold. And the Russians have had a lot of problems with their oil exports because oil prices have dropped, among other reasons, because there's been so many other energy sources throughout the world that have come on stream. Oil prices have, at the wholesale level, have dropped, you know, by half over the past 5 years or so. So, as far as energy independence goes, I don't see it happening in New Hampshire, although I understand that we produce enough electricity in New Hampshire that we actually export it to other states. In other words, between Seabrook and the various power plants we have, including the gas-fired power plants, we generate more electricity in New Hampshire than we use in New Hampshire. But we're part of the New England electrical grid, and so that the energy that we produce in excess of what we need is, in effect, exported to Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, so forth.
Now, do you know if when it's exported, do we get a credit from those states that are getting the energy, or is it pretty much given away?
No, remember, when you say we, these are private companies that generate this electricity, and they're selling it, as the expression goes, into the grid. You can't say that a kilowatt produced by Seabrook stays in New Hampshire. It goes into the grid, and who knows where it goes. It's sort of like money. It's fungible. You can't trace it. So we only know that the volume that we generate is greater than the volume that we consume. And so the difference is being used by other states which consume more than they produce. But that's the purpose of the grid, sharing.
Now, the White Mountains, have you had a chance to get up there and take a couple of hikes up, say, Flume Gorge or Gannon Mountain?
Not recently, but this summer we weren't there, but last summer we did a lot of touring.
How would you say when you're up there, what was the tourist level looking like? Was it looking very positive, or?
Hey, this is one guy, and anything I give you is anecdotal. I like it when there aren't too many other people around, so in one sense, I'm very pleased when we choose a time when not too many people are in the flume or leaf peeping or whatever it is. So I'm not really a good one to give you an answer about how well the tourism is doing. There are others who actually get this information. Either they own businesses that cater to tourists and they can tell you sales are up or down compared to prior years, or they do surveys like some folks in the state Department of, let's see, it's not
Talking about dread or
Yeah, but DRED was bifurcated. We have the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources and the Department of Business Affairs. I think that's what its name is. So this is probably natural resources that would have information because they collect data on tourism and the use of our natural resources. The Governor's Office of Energy and Planning, which is now called the Office of Strategic Initiatives, also does some work in that area. But you're asking the wrong guy. I'm just a tourist with everyone else.
all right. Well, it looks like we're getting close to the end of the show. Just want to quickly ask a couple of questions because we've had a lot happening at the national level. What are your thoughts with what's been going on with the Affordable Care Act and the adjustments that have been happening with the executive orders?
Taking initiatives um, which contribute to the continued downfall and deterioration of that legislation, and Congress, at least at this stage, trying to save it. Not to repeal and replace it, but to save it. And so I can't support the Alexander Murray compromise. But I guess I have a different sense of personal responsibility. To me, um, each of us, unless we have some sort of physical or mental problem and are truly impoverished, are responsible for ourselves, and we should be providing our own health insurance. Just as I provide my own automobile insurance and my own homeowner's insurance, I should be providing my own health insurance. And the Affordable Care Act took a group of people who were capable of working, were not particularly wealthy, but were not impoverished. They were not rich, but not poor, and said, we're going to give you subsidized health insurance. I don't think that's the right thing to do.
All right. Now, with the last few minutes, do you have any messages for the viewers out there for New Hampshire? Anything inspirational for them, or
Yeah, these kinds of shows are for a certain kind of person who is really a policy wonk or a political junkie or someone who is really enmeshed in community life detail to an extraordinary extent. And the folks who watch it and have those perspectives, more power to you. But for most people, certainly in my town, I think in Nashua too, these kinds of shows are for people who are dealing in areas that really are of no interest to them. They have personal lives and other things that they want to do and really shouldn't and really don't need to get involved in the level of detail that this show gets involved in. Those folks should be out, as I hope they are, at sporting events, family picnics, traveling to the White Mountains and enjoying the beautiful scenery in New Hampshire, and just enjoying life because they've chosen that route. And those folks who watch this show are those people who are deeply involved in making the community as good as possible for everyone else to enjoy in the way that they choose to. So some of us really want to help others do what they want in their lives, and that gives us a great deal of satisfaction. And those are the folks who I hope are watching this show, because we need to share information. We need to discuss these things. But for most of us, and many of my friends, they have other things that are more important in their lives than the things that we do, which I like to think make the important things in their lives possible.
all right. Well, Representative Kurk, thank you.
Pleasure
And
to be here.
to my viewers, if there's a city election in your city or town, don't forget to vote. Nashua, it's November 7th. I believe Manchester's also November 7th. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.